Hello, everyone, and welcome on this new episode of Education Futures. Today, we're very happy, Laurent and I, to be with Kristen. Kristen, you're the Chief Learning Officer of Khan Academy. Is that right?
That's correct. Thanks for having me today. I know lots of people, what is a chief learning officer? I lead our content, product design, assessment, and community support team. So most of what folks see if you go to Khan Academy are things that my team helped design and create.
That's amazing. It's a great privilege for us to have you on the podcast, and we have lots of questions for you, Kristen. And we are big followers of your work. So first question is around, the future of education in the age of AI. It's the topic of this podcast. What excites you the most when you think about AI and the possibilities it has for education?
I think we have for a long time been continuing to try to address the issue that too many students do not graduate from high school with the skills, the knowledge, the attributes they need to be successful in whatever they want to do next. And so most of my career in educational technology has been around how do we improve learning outcomes for all students. And I think AI gives us another tool to help solve that problem. I will say I am not the person who thinks it's going to solve everything for us in terms of learning outcomes, but I think it does many things we haven't been able to do before.
Absolutely. And I also want to highlight the fact that I love how evidence-based your work is. And, in ed tech in general, it's still quite rare to see companies that are so engaged into getting their work proofed by science. So well done on your efforts on that.
Thank you. We have a team of efficacy researchers, but I have a PhD in educational psychology. So I come to this ed tech space from that side instead of the technologist side of the world. And so that leads to a lot of that wanting to understand what's working and why.
Yeah, that must help a lot. And I'm not surprised. So there are a number of states in the US, but also across the globe, who are considering right now eliminating all screens in classrooms. And so I wanna have a chat with you about this because that's also what we've seen in France, where we're from, Laura and I. And so we'd love to understand how you see this, and how you react to that massive banning of screens.
Yes. So I think this past year in the US, we saw a lot of cell phone bans, which have, I think, led actually to some pretty good results in those places where there is some evidence about whether it's worked or not in terms of reducing the distractions for students, reducing the social media. Unfortunately, other folks have then jumped on that and said, well, let's get rid of all the screens then. That seems like a good idea. And that is a little bit of overreaction. And the issue is, of course, that means throwing out the good with the bad. And to your point about evidence, in my reading, we do know that there are things that technology can do to support teachers and learners that can't happen without technology. For example, one of the important things we know for students to do is to practice. When you're learning a new skill, you have to have multiple attempts with feedback and support on practicing that skill yourself. And for a single teacher in a classroom full of students, it is very difficult to both provide the support for students who are on, 6 or 8 different levels of learning and give that immediate feedback to them on whether they're on the right track or off track or how to get back on track. And technology can help with that. So if we get rid of all the technology, we're getting rid of all that support for that independent practice for learners as one example of what can happen.
And how do you convince people that, because Khan Academy has published a lot of papers about the impact that you just explained, and I feel that the issue is not the screen but what's inside the screen. I think that's what you're trying to explain. But how do we explain that to people who just come and just want to ban the screen? What's the message we need to develop?
Yes, this is the question about, what drives decision makers and policy makers and all of those things, which is a whole different area of expertise. I think what I have found is different groups are driven by different things. So, for instance, we find that school leaders are often driven by what their peers are doing. And so they, in the US, we have school superintendents who lead our school districts, and they are very often driven by what their neighbor superintendents are doing. And that's how you think about getting that influence, not reading the academic papers, but figuring, who are the influential superintendents and how do they talk to each other. And that's kind of how you think about change and influence in those spaces. And then we have policymakers, and for them, it's often, they are often hearing from their parent constituents about concerns about these things. And so there it's sometimes getting into and talking to parent groups about, what is going to help their students learn and how to move ahead and how to think smartly about screen time in ways that are accessible for parents. And so that's another place where we find that there's sometimes a good avenue for helping folks understand the pluses and minuses, and to your point that technology is a tool. It can be good and it can be bad, and we need to think a little more nuanced about it.
Yes, absolutely. And you talked about it just now. Schools often track how many hours a kid sits in front of a laptop or a screen, whatever the screen is. And you say it's not the best metric.
Right. It's easy because it's easy to count, oh, you're on this for an hour a day or 2 hours a day, but it doesn't actually tell you if someone is learning from it. So on Khan Academy, on our data dashboards, the information we provide to teachers and administrators and parents, we do have time, of course, but we also then have, for us, a measure of learning. And on our site, we call it skills to proficient, because each time on Khan Academy, when you practice a skill, you move as you get more questions right from attempted to familiar to proficient to mastered. And we know when students get to at least proficient on a skill, they are more likely then to be able to apply that skill outside of our platform on a future test, all of those kinds of things. So we count how many skills do you get to proficient, and that's actually a measure of learning. The problem with time is if you're just tracking time, you don't know what that time is really spent doing. I can put put the site up and then spend the rest of my time like messing around on my desk, talking to my friends, and you don't really get a measure of learning. So we find that if you can get those measures of learning, they're going to give you a better sense of whether someone is actually benefiting from the time they're spending on the screens.
Just trying to play devil's advocate here, because media always communicate about time spent on screens. And my question would be, is it really a bad measurement? Because if a kid is on a screen, maybe he's not, playing with other kids or collaborating in real life. And like, is it still a good measurement of other things than learning?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying like never keep track of time. I'm just saying if you're interested in student learning, don't use time as a proxy for learning. Try to measure learning more directly. But it is absolutely okay to be keeping track of how much time students are spending on screens. And um, I'll give you the opposite argument, which is that many schools and districts will adopt education technology tools, and then they never get used. So the opposite thing we see when we track time is sometimes we see there's no time spent on screens, and we are not going to see learning outcomes from that. So we had this, some third-party researchers do an evaluation of about 200,000 students who just had their schools had adopted Khan Academy, and across that whole group, the average time spent was like 6 or 7 minutes a year on Khan Academy. So of course they're not going to see learning outcomes from that. And it's like, the thought is, okay, if you're going to adopt a tool, you need to think about how we're going to use it. How are you going to implement it in your classroom? It's not just we buy the tool and magic learning happens. And so, yes, tracking time can be important, but it needs to be paired with learning too.
It's the case with so many edtech tools that schools buy them and then you see no usage at all. How, in your opinion, how can we bridge that gap for all the edtech entrepreneurs listening to this podcast?
Yes. So it really is the relationship between the technology and the school, because the technology itself, it can't break into that system alone. And so there's a idea of systems thinking, where you think about not just a single component, but all of the components and how they interact. So if I think about a classroom, you've got the student, the teacher, the technology, and the student and the teacher both have ideas about what their role is in the classroom, what the things they're supposed to do, and what they are willing to give and let the technology do and what they're not. And for technology just to come in and say, we're going to do all of this without any thought about how does that interact with what the students and the teachers think is their role, is, I think, a real, can be a real issue. And then often we end up with implementations where there's no support for the teacher about how to use this tool, and no thought about how does it integrate into their instructional plan? When are they supposed to use it? When is their time in the day? All of those need to be planned for as part of the implementation when the technology is being adopted.
Hmm. And for our listeners, and also for myself, I'm wondering, Khan Academy, is it used mainly in schools now, or is it also used at home for homeschooling, for example, or for after-school activities? What is the percentage of usage in both B2C and B2School?
Good question. Folks who've been around a while know that Khan Academy started as a tool for independent learners. And, Sal made videos in his closet for his cousin, and it kind of went from there. In 2018 and 2019, the organization realized that while that's a great strategy and got millions of users, it wasn't getting to the students who needed it the most, the students who weren't out looking for help with math problems, who would just, not doing the math problems, putting them away, all of those things. And where are those students? Those students are in classrooms. So we built a district's offering, which means that a school district can get our content, of course, is always free for teachers, for students, et cetera. But if a district wants to adopt it, they can get teacher professional learning. They get automatic rostering, which means that the Khan Academy talks to the school's information system and puts students into classes automatically, so you don't have to enter them all, et cetera. You get reports for the school district about usage and learning, and all of those things as part of the district piece of things. So we are in about 500 schools and school districts in the U.S. in those communities. And then, of course, we still have our large group. So we are heading, oh gosh, what are our percentages? I don't want to give you our percentages because I don't have them off the top of my head. But that is to give you a sense of where those are. It's about the 500 districts, which we are aiming for in 28, 29, getting to about 1 million students doing that. So we still have a lot of, that's our district's program. Then we have a lot of teachers that use it with their classrooms, just without being part of the district program, but still use that. And then we have the learners that are doing it on their own and just coming and finding a video from Sal that helps, or a quick practice to show them what to do.
And can you tell us more about Khanmigo? Is it a full part of Khan Academy? And how did you design it so that it's also safe for kids to use?
Yes. So Khanmigo is our AI-powered tutor for student and assistant for teachers. It is coming up in a couple weeks on the 3-year anniversary of its launch, which is crazy that we've had this AI help for 3 years now. So can work in a couple of different ways. First, it can work in what we call companion mode. So if you are working on a problem on Khan Academy and a student needs help, they can talk to Khanmigo and say, I'm stuck. They can say, I know I got it up to here, but I don't know what the next step is, and have those kinds of conversations. If they get a question wrong, they can talk to Khanmigo, figure out, get the worked example of what's going wrong, etc. So that's companion mode. They also, students can bring their own problems to Khanmigo that they're working on and are trying to get help with. And then we have a whole bunch of different activities like debate me or create a story with the AI, things that are working with the AI in different ways. And then finally, we have Writing Coach, which we released last year, where students have an essay and are able to then get feedback from Khanmigo on the introduction, the evidence for the argument, their tone and style, their organization, and go back and forth with the actual draft and Khanmigo and creating and editing their documents. So all of that is for students. We also have a whole bunch of teacher tools, from lesson planning to working through in terms of safety. One of the things teachers can do is they can review all of the chats that students have. They can get a summary of those chats. For example, if they want to know, what are the main questions that my students are asking Khanmigo, those kinds of things. So there's visibility for teachers and parents into what students are saying with Khanmigo. We also have a moderation system where there's an AI that sits outside the conversation and is monitoring the conversation for any instances of violence, hate, self-harm, and sexual content, etc. And if detects any of that, that gets flagged. An email gets sent to the school or the parent. And we actually have humans reviewing those flags too, and can reach out for severe things that we think need human eyes on them more quickly in terms of where that is. So those are some of the safety things we put in. There are 2 ways that people can access Khanmigo, because unfortunately, unlike our content, it's not free yet, because we have to pay for the AI compute. I get those bills every month. So the nice part is Microsoft actually covers our costs for the teacher tools. So for the teacher tools are free for all teachers globally around the world, can try those. But our student features, either individual students can pay to get access to Khanmigo, or the district, as part of that district offering that I was talking about, it is rolled into that as well. So that's a little bit about Khanmigo.
Thank you. It's true that these tutors have a cost. Laurent just wrote a beautiful piece on Substack around that idea, but they have a cost.
And that was my question. Do you have clues on maybe having Khanmigo evolve to something very cheaper, because we see the price of the tokens decreasing month after month, even if now we have models that consume more and more tokens. So overall, if you follow the trend, you are going to spend more and more money. But is there a way now to make Khanmigo very cheap?
Yeah, so it already has substantially. So when we first released in 2023, we thought we were going to have to charge, in the district offering, $70 per student per year. Then the next year we said the costs of the models came down so much, we said 35. So cut in half, $35 per student per year. This year, it is actually still rolled into the cost of the whole. You get all of Khan Academy plus Khanmigo for $15 per student per year. This is all US dollars. And so already it's coming, that's like significant decreases in what we've seen. The question then is also, will open source models end up being, clearly that's a cheaper way to do it. the question is, can they perform as well as some of the foundational models? And at this point, so we have a large evaluation system where we can put a model in and test out on a variety of things, like, does it give the students the answer? Does it, is it accurate at math? All of those kinds of things that we can test for. And so we can test the models and say, does this open source model do these kind of tutoring behaviors as well as Gemini, as well as GPT-5, as well as Claude, and how do those three compare to each other? And so our decisions are always a combination of performance. Does it do what we need it to in terms of tutoring? And then price. So far, the open models aren't quite there yet, but I think, in the future, certainly we can see a future where they will get up to the standards where we need them to be able to do the tasks, the tutoring activities we want them to do. And then certainly that would bring the cost way down.
For the non-techies who are listening, so are you taking a model and then you train the model? So, for example, you would train Claude to be a learning scientist or a teacher who has all this experience and this knowledge and how the brain learns. How do you train your tutor, Khanmigo, so that it's, top learning science going towards the AI and the conversations itself?
Good question. That is not what happens. So we are not training the models at all. We are using they call them foundational models that the big tech companies create, and then we control it through prompts. And the prompts are basically sets of instructions that you give to the models. So you can say, hey, act like a tutor. Here are the good tutor moves to make. Here are the tutor things not to do as a good tutor. We also can inject, for example, if you're working on a Khan Academy problem, we inject, here's the problem they're working on. Here's the answer to that problem. Here's the hints that our humans have written to help students answer that problem. And all of that comes through. We can also, for that student, I was talking before about their mastery status on a skill, attempted or familiar or proficient or mastered. We can also tell the model, this student is already proficient at this, which then means that the model is less likely to give a lot of help and more likely to be, just corrective in what it's doing. So all of that, these aren't, when we first started back in 2022, when we first got access to this big model, we gave it a 3-sentence instruction. We said, you are a Socratic tutor. I am a student. Do not tell me the answer. Our prompts are much more complex. They actually are series of prompts that are linked together. Sometimes we have like 3 different AI agents working together, one that's having the conversation, one that's scoring the response, one that's monitoring. So it's quite complex in the background, but none of it is actually retraining the models. We have been involved in a couple of different efforts, one with Microsoft on training a model specifically to be a math tutor. So it was a smaller model. We call these big models large language models. This was like a medium language model. So there's less data in it. And we find that those models with the less data, they sometimes are more accurate, but they lose some of the magic of the conversation and the ways that the really large models are able to interact, and they aren't able to do those kinds of things. So we've experimented some with trying to train models in different ways, but at this point we're not, and we're just controlling them through the instructions that we give them.
Fascinating.
And
Fascinating.
and for more techie people listening to the podcast, when you say you are retraining a model, you mean that you are doing some fine tuning on the model. No, you are really
That's what we
retraining.
tried. We attempted fine tuning,
Yeah.
and we've also had Microsoft attempting to build their own kind of medium language model. So we've done both fine tuning and contributing our data to
Super interesting.
various things. And when I say contributing our data, I also want to be clear. We don't use student data to train other people's large language models. What we usually offer is our own questions and answers, because that's a ton of data, quality data, because you've got to real question and a known answer that is the right answer to that question. So we have offered that data to lots of various folks that are trying to build their own models to and fine-tune models to be, more accurate and more tutors.
Amazing. This is so useful. And Kristen, there is one thing that keeps you up at night is the cognitive offloading of kids and young people. And some people say you don't have to memorize anymore, don't have to memorize math or history, dates, or any type of facts. You can just look them up. And I'm really scared that a lot of young people now are going the easy route without the friction of learning. You're a learning scientist. What is your standpoint on this?
Yeah, so there's two things in what you said. One is do you need to know foundational skills? And the two is cognitive offloading for all kinds of things. I'm very clear on this. One, we still do need foundational skills. And two, the idea of just offloading our thinking to an AI as we're learning is, to me, the existential threat to kids learning things. Learning is hard. Our brains experience that as hard. We kind of evolutionarily have evolved to recognize faces, to pick up, our first language. Those are things we kind of learn without trying. But reading, writing, math reasoning, all of that takes effort. We call it cognitive effort. It's the thinking that's happening in your brain. And biologically, it's literally neurons are making connections to each other. And that requires a lot of effort. And kids don't always experience that as fun or engaging. And so because of that, I understand they're thinking, how can I get this the easiest way possible? And unfortunately, getting it the easiest way possible means they're not going to learn the thing. There has to be some of that friction to be able to learn. And that's really important. The other thing we hear a lot is, well, we just need to focus on the higher order thinking skills, critical thinking, communication. Of course, those are important, but you can't think about nothing. You can't communicate about nothing. If you don't have the foundational skills, you don't have the ability to reason and understand and turn those in different ways. One of the most creative people I've ever known was actually a statistician who knew so much about statistics and all of that she could then take it and apply it in really interesting and different ways. But she couldn't have done any of that without having the foundational knowledge of how statistics works and, how probability and all of that functions. So I don't think we can say, oh, we don't need anything. We're just going to focus on the critical thinking. How do you evaluate the output of an AI if you don't know the facts and have an understanding of it? So yeah, that's both of those are clear things. We need foundational skills and we can't just be offloading all of our thinking.
How do we make that effort more fun? Because I think you're drawn on something so important that, how I know it's effort, I know it's friction, but is there a way maybe to make it more fun, maybe with some gamification? I'm sure that you have experimented with this at Khan Academy.
Well, so before Khan Academy, I will tell you, I spent a good amount of time in the game-based learning and assessment space. In 2012, 2013, I was part of a group that got to work with the designers at EA, the big gaming company, and we were trying to design SimCity EDU, right? So you can imagine taking the big SimCity game and being like, okay, we were actually creating an assessment of systems thinking based on this. Oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing because kids love to play SimCity and it'll be great. You may notice none of us are playing SimCity EDU today.
What
so
happened?
I actually, let me tell you. So it turns out that in order to really focus on the ideas of systems thinking, we had to kind of the kids would do all kinds of things as they're building their cities. For those who aren't familiar, in SimCity, you basically it's an open sandbox kind of game where you build your own city. Well, kids did so many different things that they could play for hours and hours and never get to actually the things we wanted to teach them and we wanted them to learn. But the more we constrained the game experience, the less fun it became. So the tension between thing that made the game fun and being able to do the learning was pretty difficult to kind of work through and pull together. There were other issues too at the technology of the time, and we spent 8 or 9 months building this game that covered about a week of curriculum, which isn't very efficient in terms of building and making things. But so that's a long way of saying there are some interesting gamification features, things like streaks and those kinds of things that we do find motivate students. But we have a phrase internally that human high fives beat computer confetti. And the big things that motivate kids are relationships and humans and other people. And so there's a theory in psychology called expectancy value theory that basically says you do something when, one, you expect you can be successful at it, because who wants to do things that they think they're going to fail at? And two, you value doing that thing. And so then the question becomes, how do we help kids value doing the thing? And how do we help them expect that they will be successful if they put the hard work into it? But the value piece, a lot of that comes from your teacher. We find the biggest predictor, I was talking about, the average of that whole 200,000 students study was 6 hours a year. The places where we see the 18 hours a year, the 20 hours a year that we know get to big usage, it's places where the teachers are asking the students, the teachers are assigning to the students, the teachers are there telling the students, good job. Oh, I'm seeing you make progress. Look at this. We're doing this all together. Like, that is a really powerful motivator, and students who have good human relationships with their teachers then value their opinion, and what they're telling them is important, and what they're signaling are the things that are going to help them learn. So I think it is much more on the human side than it is actually on the things that we do on the platform.
What do you say to dystopian, people who say that, soon AI is going to replace teachers? And I mean, do you believe in that future? Even if fast forward 50 years, do you believe that we'll have like robots teaching us? Do you believe that's possible?
I I cannot imagine that is the future, because so much of learning is social. So much of this, we talked about the teachers, but also the peers and how we learn from each other, how we work together in classrooms, the friends you make in school, all of those, things that you never have friends like you did when you were 12. All of that is true. And so I think that, there's big important parts of this that humans play in education that I think if we lost those, we wouldn't see the learning outcomes that we need to see. It has to be a partnership between the
Mm.
teachers and the students and the humans, with technology in the mix, but not as a replacement.
And what do you think of human AI relations? Is it something that you study at Khanmigo? I feel that as a society we lack but like we don't really know how it works. Is it something you study, like having kids, considering, I don't know, Khanmigo as their friend, or having a feeling of relationship with an AI? Is it something?
We think about it a lot. So on purpose, Khanmigo does not have a human name. Khanmigo, we refer to Khanmigo as it. It is a thing, and we do a lot to actually prevent students from anthropomorphizing Khanmigo, for thinking it's a human, from thinking it, is able to uh, form a relationship with them. Now, some would say that that actually is going to decrease its effectiveness as a tutor, because potentially something, when you're working one-on-one with a tutor, part of that is the relationship you have with the tutor. And if we're restricting the AI from having those relationships, are we restricting its effectiveness as a tutor? Maybe, but at this point, we're willing to risk that, because we are not comfortable with kids thinking that they're able to have a relationship with the AI. I think we're in a space, this is another space where I think there's a lot of potential regulation coming in, because we've certainly seen individual anecdotes where people have had these kind of relationships and the AI has given them, advice around suicide and mental health and all kinds of things that have led to some pretty terrible outcomes. So that we certainly need to figure out what are the guardrails to guard against that. But also, I think there's just a lot of danger in the space of human AI relationships.
That's also another topic that keeps us up at night, the emotional
Yes.
offloading, right? Like
Yep.
kids feeling that the AI anthropomorphizing it and then feeling it's their friend or more. And yeah, that's a real concern.
And they're so sycophantic that they're just telling you, they're just repeating back what they they think you want to hear. And so they're not challenging the students on anything. So yeah, it's a real problem.
It is. And that makes me think about the Khan Academy framework for responsible AI that you published recently. And I would love to hear more about it because, a lot of companies say that they are ethical, but very few really have guardrails in their code or in everything they do on a daily basis. So can you tell us a bit more about that framework?
Yes. So we struggled because, as you said, there's already all of these kind of frameworks out there that have guidelines, say 8 to 10 guidelines, do this, do this. And they all sound good, but we couldn't, how do you implement that then into your day-to-day of building software tools? And so we took one of those kind of lists of good ideas, which is an AI for education framework. And then in the US, there's this National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they have this idea of risk management. And so we thought that that was helpful. The idea of, okay, if you're building something, think about what the risks are. What are the potential downsides? What's the bad things that could happen here? Okay, we'll name those, and then we can rank them. Is this likely to happen? Like, is there a low, medium, or high likelihood of this happening? And then if it happens, how bad is it? Like, yeah, it's not great, but it's not terrible, or this is really bad and we need to do everything to make sure, even if it's a low probability of happening, that it doesn't happen. So then we can rank those risks and then start looking across them. And okay, what's a high risk of happening and a high risk and, a high impact if it does? All right, let's think about how we build this in a way that then mitigates that risk. So to make that really concrete, when we were just starting to build Khanmigo, we said, all right, what's the likelihood? What's there's a risk around students trying to use this for non-educational purposes. What's the likelihood of that risk? It's really high. Have you met a middle schooler? Of course, they're going to try to use this for non-educational things and try to get Khanmigo to talk about it. What's the impact of that risk? Well, in some ways, it could be pretty low if they're just kids goofing around, but it could be pretty high if it's, students that are interacting with Khanmigo in ways that are, how do we talking about violence and sexual content and hate and all of those kinds of things. So we said, all right, this is a high likelihood of happening, and it could have a high impact if it does. So what are the things that we can build to make it less likely to happen and less impactful if it does? And so that was actually what led to a lot of the things, the guardrails we were talking about that we built in, like transparency of the transcripts to teachers and their parents, like the moderation system that we input in, because those were all about reducing the risk of that happening. So that's kind of how we translate these big ideas about ethics into a day-to-day practice around risks and reducing risks of the tools.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if that's really a risk, considering that ChatGPT, for instance, is available, and is it more dangerous that a kid asks questions to Khanmigo than to just another open model available freely and over the internet? Or maybe is it just that at school Khanmigo is available, but maybe not ChatGPT, or is it something like that?
That's right. It's
Yeah,
that
what's the
last
point?
piece.
Okay.
So we are thinking about we want to be the safe AI tool for schools
Yeah. Okay.
to be able to say, if this school is adopting Khan Academy and Khanmigo, we know that there are guardrails in place
Yeah.
to keep kids safe.
That
It makes
makes
sense.
sense. Yeah. We had also a question on the intercultural intercultural aspect of it all, because Khanmigo is now expanding to many languages, from Arabic to Vietnamese, if I'm not wrong. And we thought about, how do you make sure that Khanmigo stays relevant in these different languages, and different cultures are different, and pedagogy might be very
And
different.
curriculum
Sorry?
and different curriculums. Yeah.
Indeed. How do you adapt a Khanmigo?
So let's actually start without Khanmigo. So Khan Academy itself has courses that are available in 50 different languages. We have been in, I think, 190 countries. Like pretty much everyone around the world has used Khanmigo or Khan Academy and Khan Academy courses. The interesting thing about our languages and our localization in languages is those are all done by volunteers. So I just want to give a shout out to the volunteers who loved Khan Academy so much that they said, I would like to take this course and localize it for my language and what that is. And that is, some of that is done by individuals. Like there's someone who does it on the train to work every day, to some of our Japanese translations, to the Bibliothèque Sans Frontières actually does our French translations. But all as, and it's not just translation. It also is the thinking about, how does this localize to our, our space and our culture. So that's how we've done that for Khan Academy. Khanmigo is not actually being released in many countries. Right now, it is just released with some district partners in Brazil, in India, and there is a pilot in Vietnam. But we're doing it very slowly because we don't have a lot of control over these large language models and how they're responding. And so we've wanted to do this carefully and slowly and understand what's working and what's not. And there are absolutely issues that come up, particularly around things like history and how different countries interpret the events of history, and how does Khanmigo respond to that. And so, it's going to respond with a very Western kind of interpretation of events and what that looks like. And so there's a lot to figure out there. And I'll just be clear, we do not have the answers about how that's gonna work and scale around the world, which is why we're not just releasing it to everyone and all at once.
That makes total sense. And there's a question we love asking. It's around, your personal view of the school of the future. If Kristen, if you could build the school of the future, if you could imagine it, a future-proof school that would be suited for the year 2040, how would it look like? I know Khan Academy has a Khan Lab school, so maybe your answer would be Khan Lab school is the future-proof school you're looking for. So, but I'm curious to know your view.
Yes. So Khan Lab School is an in-person school. It's quite small. There's about 300 students from kindergarten through 12th grade, but I am on the board. And Khan Lab School very much looks like, as you can imagine, the students do use Khan Academy for lessons and foundational skills, and then spend a lot of time, and these students are so impressive, engaged in projects and project-based learning, and doing all kinds of things from entrepreneurship to there was a young woman a couple of years ago who basically designed and built an entire business around building habitats for hamsters, or might have been guinea pigs. I'm sorry, I'm getting it wrong. But anyway, like got the whole supply chain of how to get these things built and, shipped and all of the things. So just like amazing things that they do that then require them to learn a lot of skills, but also build on those foundational skills and what that looks like, but gives them that why am I learning this? What is the purpose of all of this? So I think those are great, but those require this. Like I said, this is a small school, and doing that at scale is not going to be, an easy task to think about. How do we make that happen in all of the schools and all of the spaces? But I do think the combination of the technology to build those foundational skills and get that solid work, along with the projects and the experiential learning that are really important for then building the skills you need to be successful in the future, to me is the right combination, and is really difficult to do. But if I could design the schools, that would be what they look like.
Mm. We hear a lot about also the alpha school model. And a lot of
All
people
right.
have pros and cons. So what is the difference between Lab school and alpha schools?
So let me say this. We're recording this the last week in February 2026. Last week, there was an article in a site called 404 that I'm not particularly familiar with, but they basically said the journalists reached out to us for comment and then said, Alpha School has taken Khan Academy and has somehow put a wrapper around it, rebranded it Nice Academy, but the screenshots that they shared were essentially Khan Academy. Want to be clear, our content is always free. If they had wanted to become a Khan Academy district, they could have. They charge a lot of tuition in many places and are not giving and participating in that district program. So I'm a little skeptical of what's going on there. And the difficulty is they have not been transparent with what they're doing. They're making a lot of claims about what their outcomes are, but I can't tell you what's different or what's not because they're not being transparent about what they're using. And if that reporting was right, it appears they're using Khan Academy. But yeah, so as of right now, it's pretty unclear what's happening there, and we need a better understanding of what they're doing before we can say this is a good model or not.
True, it's hard to find like exact information what's going on. So yeah, but the idea of having kids go on Khan Academy, what happens at Lab school is that in the morning or a few hours a day, they sit in front of their screen and then they do project based learning or sports or music or whatever. Is that right?
Those kinds of things. And it is structured. There are more, blocks in the day, and teachers are doing some delivery of content and group learning because, again, there is that peer learning is an important piece of it. So it isn't just you're on the computer by yourself or you're doing your own independent project. There's group, work in there as well. And there are, structured periods throughout the day that kids are moving from class to class, et cetera. So that's a combination of kind of what traditional school looks like, and then adding both more technology in some places and more project-based learning in other places.
Fascinating.
What there isn't is a lot of a teacher standing in front of a classroom delivering a lesson.
And are there like some skills that you teach at Lab school that are not taught in the curriculum in other public schools, for example? Do you have like created a curriculum that is slightly different from the other schools in the US, or do you follow the same curriculum?
So they use a variety of different. A variety of different tools. There's something in the U.S., and I don't know if this has been an international thing. This is called a portrait of a graduate, which basically is kind of a list of the skills you want a graduate to have, and all kinds of schools have started to kind of create this piece, and so it sets out what is the goal, what are the skills we want students to leave here having. Not surprisingly, many of them are things like critical thinking and communication and collaboration skills. The trick in many places, and we haven't necessarily solved this at the lab school either, is how do you teach those skills? We often talk about collaboration and we just put kids in groups and tell them to do group work, but we don't actually teach them how to collaborate with each other and give them feedback on how well they're doing collaborating with each other and how they can improve. And so all of that needs, if we really value those skills, I'm just a proponent that we need to do better at explicitly teaching them as opposed to assuming they kind of develop along the way.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Laurent, you wanted to say something?
No, I was trying to look at this portrait of a graduate thing, and it's not a thing in France.
No.
And the first time I'm hearing that, but that's something we should definitely do everywhere. Like it's a super interesting way of thinking the curriculum, actually.
Absolutely. Is that every school that draws this portrait of where the skills are needed, or is it a common thing for a district or state or the US in general?
It's kind of one of those, in education, there's trends.
Yeah, it's a trend.
And
Yeah,
for the past couple of years, it's kind of been a trend. No one is mandated to do it, but many districts have kind of looked at it and said, oh, that's an interesting thing that we'd like to do, and have adopted it.
Hmm. Very interesting. All right. Kristen, there's one last question that we love to ask all of our guests is who should we have on the podcast next? Like, do you have any ideas of people who are really changing the way kids learn or use AI safely? We love to talk to scientists. We love to talk to teachers, to school leaders, to chief learning officers, to lots of different people. And so I know you might have tons of ideas and lots of different people in your network, but if we had to pick one or two for our next guest, who would they be?
So I'm a big fan of Isabel Howe, H-A-U, her last name. She's at Stanford. I recommend folks read her book. And she's been talking a lot recently about relational intelligence, and is that the next big intelligence that we need? And I think that's very interesting, and she has some interesting thoughts there. So she would be a good recommendation, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll definitely reach out to Isabel. And yes, I've been following her work closely. So let's hope that she will agree to be on the podcast. Thank you so much, Kristen, for your incredible, useful insights and for being here with us on this show.
My
thank
pleasure.
you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me.